My son-in-law, Richard, a man whose soul was a barren ledger of debits and credits, told me I belonged in a coffin. He said it during an argument about money, his voice not loud, but low and venomous with a chilling, practical greed. He looked at me, his mother-in-law, the woman who had raised the wife he professed to love, and he saw not a person, but an expense, an unprofitable asset, a life that was costing him more than it was worth. He only understood the true, cold weight of his words a month later, when he stumbled upon the most beautiful handcrafted coffin he had ever seen, resting in the silence of his own garage, waiting for an occupant. A coffin with a small, elegantly engraved brass plate bearing not my name, but his. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Adeline. My name is Adeline Monroe. I am 83 years old, and my life has been spent in the company of wood. Not as a carpenter myself, but as the wife, partner, and devoted admirer of one. My late husband, Arthur, was a master woodworker, a poet whose verses were written in oak and walnut and cherry. He could make wood sing. Our home was a symphony of his work, and his workshop in our basement was the most sacred place I have ever known. This is a story about wood and about rage. It is the story of how a quiet, grieving widow, a woman who had never lifted a hammer in anger, used her husband's forgotten tools and his sacred craft to build a monument to her own fury. This is a story that smells of sawdust and varnish and a cold, patient, righteous wrath. It's a secret I have kept, because it is a terrible thing to wish a person into a coffin. But it is perhaps a more terrible thing to be told you belong in one. And a debt, as my son-in-law, the accountant, would say, must always be paid. Before I open the door to that workshop, I ask for your support. Please, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your presence here, your active listening, gives me the courage to speak of the time when my grief became a blueprint and my anger became an act of terrible, beautiful creation. To understand the coffin, you must first understand the man who taught me everything I know about them, my Arthur. He was more than a carpenter. He was an artist. He didn't just build tables and chairs. He built things that lived, things that held the spirit of the tree they came from. Our house, a sturdy old farmhouse we bought for a song and spent 50 years filling with love, was his gallery. He built our four-poster bed from a single magnificent black walnut tree that had fallen in a storm. He built the bookshelves that lined our living room, the rocking chair I sat in to nurse our daughter, Claire, the intricate mantelpiece over the fireplace where we warmed our feet on cold winter nights. His greatest passion, in his later years, was a strange one. He became fascinated with the art of coffin making. Not in a morbid way. He saw it as the ultimate act of woodworking, the final, most intimate piece of furniture a person would ever own. He called them final cradles. He would study the old Victorian designs, the simple, elegant lines of shaker caskets. He never sold them. But sometimes, for a dear friend who had passed, he would retreat to his workshop, and, as an act of love and grief, he would build one. A beautiful, handcrafted vessel to carry a cherished soul on its final journey. His workshop in our basement was his sanctuary. It smelled of cedar and linseed oil and the sweet, sharp scent of freshly cut wood. It was a place of beautiful, controlled chaos. Tools hung in perfect order on the walls, their metal surfaces gleaming. Stacks of wood, cured for years, leaned against the walls, each plank holding the promise of a future creation. I would spend hours down there, just watching him work, listening to the music of his craft. I learned the names of the tools not by using them, but by hearing them in his stories. The dovetail saw, the block plane, the mortising chisels. I learned the difference between the grain of an oak and a maple by the way he would run his hand over the surface, as if reading a story written in Braille. I absorbed the craft through my pores by sheer proximity to his passion. When he died, the first thing I did was lock the workshop door. I could not bear the silence of that sacred, holy place. My daughter, Claire, was the light of our lives. She grew up surrounded by this love of craft and history. But she was a practical girl, a girl who longed for a life of more modern comforts. She became a nurse, a caring and competent woman, but one who was, perhaps, a little too susceptible to the lure of a life of ease. She met Richard when she was 30. He was a successful financial consultant, a man who moved through the world with an aura of crisp, confident authority. He was handsome, ambitious, and utterly devoted to her. I wanted to like him. I tried to like him. But from the very beginning, there was something about him that set my teeth on edge. A coldness in his eyes. A transactional quality to his charm. He did not look at my home, at Arthur's beautiful, handmade creations, with admiration. He looked at them with the cool, appraising eye of an auctioneer. He saw not stories, but assets. He saw not a life, but an estate. After Claire and Richard married, they bought a large new house in a wealthy suburb, a house with white walls, and recessed lighting, and a kitchen that looked like it had never been used. They were happy, I suppose. They had the life they wanted. A life of dinner parties, of European vacations, of expensive cars. A life built, I now know, on a precarious foundation of debt and a ravenous hunger for more. My own life changed when I had a fall. A simple accident, a missed step, but it resulted in a broken leg and a long, difficult recovery. My old farmhouse, with its steep stairs and its drafty rooms, was no longer a safe place for me. The decision was made, not by me, but for me. It was presented by Richard, of course, as the only logical, sensible solution. "Adeline," he said, sitting in a chair by my hospital bed, his voice a smooth, reasonable purr. "We've been running the numbers. It's time to sell the farm. The equity in the property is significant. We can invest it, create a portfolio that will generate a steady income to cover all your future needs. You'll move in with us. Claire can look after you. It's the perfect plan. You'll be safe, and your financial future will be secure." He made it sound like a business proposal. A merger. He was acquiring my life and my assets. Claire sat beside him, nodding, her face a mask of concern. "It's for the best, Mom," she said. "We'll worry about you all alone in that big house." What could I do? I was weak, in pain, and utterly dependent on their goodwill. I agreed. I signed the papers he put in front of me. The power of attorney. The real estate listings. The financial transfer documents. I signed my world away. The dismantling of my home was a quiet, brutal process. An estate sale was held. Strangers walked through my rooms, picking over the remnants of my life, their hands touching Arthur's beautiful work, assessing its value in dollars and cents. Richard and Claire, of course, saved the most valuable pieces. Not for sentimental reasons, but as investments. The grandfather clock. A beautiful, hand-carved chest. A set of walnut dining chairs. They were loaded into a moving van, not as memories, but as assets to be absorbed into their own portfolio of possessions. I moved into their large, silent house. I was given a small bedroom on the ground floor, a room that was clean, beige, and utterly devoid of character. It was clear from the beginning that I was not a part of their life. I was an annex to it. I was a problem that had been solved, an asset that was now under new management. The first year was a quiet, lonely purgatory. My leg healed, but my spirit did not. I was a ghost in their house, a silent, slow-moving presence that was a constant, low-level irritation to my son-in-law. My medical needs were a source of endless, sighing complaint. The cost of my prescriptions, my physical therapy, the special food I required, each one was an entry on the debit side of his mental ledger. Richard's resentment was a palpable thing. It was in the way he would pointedly turn up the volume on the television when I tried to speak. It was in the way he would ask Claire, in a loud, pointed voice, "Did you remember to file Mother's insurance claim? We can't afford to let those things slide." He began to talk about my eventual death with a chilling, practical eagerness. He would discuss funeral homes, burial plots, and the cost of caskets, as if he were planning a corporate retreat. "We need to be practical, Claire," he'd say at the dinner table, while I sat there, a silent, invisible witness. "These things need to be planned in advance, We need to know the costs. We need to protect the principle of the estate. The estate. My estate. He was talking about the money he would inherit when I died, and he was angry that I was spending it on the inconvenient business of staying alive. Claire, my daughter, was a willing accomplice to his cruelty. She was seduced by the life he provided her, the life my money was funding. She saw his ghoulish financial planning not as a sign of his monstrosity, but as a sign of his practicality, his responsible nature. She would nod and agree, her own greed a quiet, complicit echo of his. The breaking point, the moment the unspoken, simmering cruelty finally boiled over into a direct verbal assault, came on a Tuesday. I had just returned from a doctor's appointment where I had received bad news. My heart was weaker than we thought. I would need a new, very expensive medication. And possibly, down the line, a pacemaker. I told them the news that evening, my voice a frail, worried whisper. Claire's face fell. I saw not concern for my health, but a flash of pure, selfish disappointment. I saw the ski trip to Aspen she had been planning vanish from her eyes. Richard's reaction was not disappointment. It was rage. A cold, quiet accountant's rage. He put down his fork and knife and he looked at me, his eyes as cold and as hard as a banker's vault. A pacemaker, he said, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. Do you have any idea what something like that costs, Adeline? And the medication? I saw the price. It's astronomical. Richard, please, Claire whispered, a flicker of shame in her eyes. No, Claire, he said, not taking his eyes off me. It's time for some honesty here. It's time for a frank discussion of cost versus benefit. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the polished table. We are pouring thousands of dollars a month into, what? Prolonging a life that has no quality? You don't go anywhere. You don't do anything. You just sit in your room and consume resources. Our resources. My resources. That's not true, Claire protested weakly. It's Mom's money. It's our money now, my dear, he said, his voice turning silky and cruel. It's the family estate, and she is draining it. She is a bad investment, a depreciating asset. He turned his cold gaze back to me. For God's sake, Adeline, he said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. We're spending a fortune just to keep you breathing. You don't have a life anymore. You're just a shell. You belong in a coffin. And frankly, the sooner the better for all of us. You belong in a coffin. The words, so final, so utterly devoid of humanity, struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was not just an insult. It was a sentence. A judgment. He had looked at me, at my life, and he had deemed it worthless, a debt to be cleared from his books. I looked at my daughter, my Claire, for whom I had rocked in a handmade chair. She was looking down at her plate, her silence a ringing, deafening affirmation of his words. I didn't say anything. I slowly, carefully, placed my napkin on the table. I stood up, my old body feeling surprisingly steady. I looked at my son-in-law, at his handsome, hateful face. And then I looked at my daughter, at her bowed, cowardly head. Excuse me, I said, my voice a quiet, empty whisper. I'm very tired. I walked back to my room and closed the door. I did not cry. The capacity for tears had been burned out of me, replaced by something cold and hard and heavy. I sat on my bed, in the silent beige room, and I thought about coffins. I thought about the beautiful, loving work of my husband's hands. I thought about the way he would choose the wood, the care with which he would cut the joints, the love he would pour into the final sanding and polishing. He built final cradles, a resting place for a soul. My son-in-law wanted me in a coffin. He had sentenced me to death. Fine, I thought. A strange, new, terrible calm settled over me. A blueprint began to form in my mind, a design of exquisite, handcrafted justice. Richard wants a coffin. Then a coffin is what he shall have. But it will not be for me. It will be a custom piece. Made to order. And it will have his name on it. That night, for the first time in years, I dreamt of my husband's workshop. I dreamt of the smell of sawdust. I dreamt of the feel of a sharp chisel in my hand. I dreamt of the beautiful, terrible, creative power of a grief that had finally found its purpose. My revenge would not be an act of destruction. It would be an act of creation. I was going to build my masterpiece. The night Richard sentenced me to my coffin, I did not sleep. I sat in the hard, unfamiliar chair in my beige room, and I let his words echo in the silence. You belong in a coffin. It was not an insult born of fleeting anger. It was a calculated financial assessment. A final, brutal entry in his ledger. He had looked at the sum of my life and deemed it a liability to be disposed of. For years, my grief for my husband, Arthur, had been a quiet, gentle ache, a constant, low hum of absence. But Richard's words had transformed it. He had taken my soft, mournful grief and, with the sheer, cold pressure of his cruelty, had compressed it into something new. Something impossibly hard and dense. A diamond of pure, cold, perfect rage. Grief makes you want to remember. Rage makes you want to act. My plan did not form in a flash of manic inspiration. It settled over me, slowly, piece by piece, like sawdust settling on a workshop floor. He wanted me in a coffin. I would give him a coffin. But it would be a coffin built not from my despair, but from my anger. It would be built not as a vessel for my death, but as a monument to his. It would be a masterpiece, and it would be a curse. To build it, I needed to go home. Not to the house that had been sold, but to the only true home I had left. The one place in the world that was still mine, still Arthur's. The workshop. The door to the basement had been kept locked since Arthur's death. It was at the back of the kitchen, a plain, wooden door that Clara and Richard passed a dozen times a day without a thought. They assumed it led to a damp, spider-filled cellar where the furnace and water heater lived. They had never once expressed any curiosity about what lay beyond it. To them, the past was a dusty, uninteresting country. They had no idea it was also an armory. The key was still on the small brass hook inside the pantry, right where Arthur had always kept it. It was tarnished with age. I took it, my hand surprisingly steady. My opportunity came 2 days later. Richard was at work. Claire, my daughter, was at her weekly bridge club, a 4-hour window of blessed, predictable absence. The house was silent. I walked to the basement door, the old key cold in my palm. The lock was stiff from years of disuse. It took all my strength to turn the key. The sound of the tumblers grinding and finally clicking open was a cannon shot in the quiet house. I froze, my heart hammering, listening. Nothing. I opened the door. A wave of cool, damp air washed over me, carrying a scent that was so familiar, it made my eyes well up with tears. It was the scent of my life. The smell of earth, of aging wood, of linseed oil, and the faint, ghostly perfume of my Arthur's pipe tobacco. The wooden stairs were steep and dark. I held on to the rough, splintery handrail and descended, step by painful step, into the past. The workshop was exactly as he had left it. A thick, pale gray blanket of dust covered everything, preserving the scene like volcanic ash. It was a shrine, a suspended animation. His tools hung in perfect, orderly rows on the pegboard walls. Hand saws of every size, a collection of chisels with worn, smooth wooden handles, clamps, and braces and levels. His heavy workbench stood in the center of the room, its surface a beautiful battlefield of nicks and scars and stains. His old leatherwork apron was still hanging on a hook by the door, a ghostly, headless effigy of the man I loved. I walked through the silent, dusty space, my fingers trailing over the surfaces, leaving clean tracks in the gray shroud. I touched the cold, cast-iron top of the table saw. I ran my hand over the blade of a block plane, its edge still lethally sharp. These were not just tools to me. They were extensions of my husband's hands, of his mind, of his soul. I knew them all. I knew their names and their purposes. I had been the silent apprentice to his 50 years of creation. And against the far wall, I saw what I had come for. The wood. Arthur was a connoisseur of wood. He collected it the way other men collect stamps or coins. He had stacks of it, carefully arranged by species, cured for years, waiting for the right project. There was oak, sturdy and honest. Pine, fragrant and soft. Cherry, with its warm reddish glow. And there, at the very back, covered by a heavy canvas tarp, was his treasure. A magnificent stack of black walnut boards, nearly 2 inches thick, their grain a deep, swirling river of chocolate and cream. He had been saving it for decades, waiting for a project worthy of its beauty. He had once joked that he was saving it to build his own final cradle. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the wood I would use. It was a desecration, of a sort. To use this beautiful sacred material for such a dark purpose. But it was also a form of justice. Richard had shown nothing but contempt for Arthur's memory, for his life's work. It was only fitting that Arthur's own treasured wood would become the vessel of his judgment. My project began that afternoon. I found an old set of Arthur's work clothes, a pair of sturdy denim overalls, and I put them on over my own. They were far too big, but they felt like a suit of armor. I found his old, detailed sketches for the coffins he had built, his beautiful, precise handwriting, a painful, comforting presence. I studied them, my mind, the old, sharp office manager's mind, absorbing the details, the measurements, the joinery. The design I chose was a simple, elegant one. A classic Victorian design with raised panels and clean, strong lines. My first task was to select and mill the boards. They were heavy, far too heavy for me to lift. But Arthur had been a man of logic and leverage. His workshop was filled with pulleys, dollies, and rollers. Using a system of ropes and levers he had built, I managed, with a monumental grunting effort, to move the first heavy walnut plank onto the workbench. Then came the work. The beautiful, terrible, cleansing work. I couldn't use the power tools. The noise would have been a dead giveaway. I had to do everything by hand, the old way, the way Arthur had loved best. I started with the hand plane. I took one of his old, perfectly balanced planes, the wooden body worn smooth by his own hands, and I began to smooth the rough-sawn plank. Shh, shh. The sound of the sharp blade shaving off a translucent, paper-thin curl of wood was the only sound in the basement. With each pass, the true beauty of the walnut was revealed, the deep, rich, swirling grain coming to life under my hands. The work was slow, painstaking, and physically agonizing. My back screamed in protest. My arthritic hands ached. But the pain was a fire that burned away my grief, leaving only the pure, hard metal of my purpose. My life fell into a new, secret rhythm. My days were a performance of frail, quiet old age in the beige rooms upstairs. My afternoons, while Claire was at bridge club and Richard was at work, were a descent into a world of secret, furious creation. I became a creature of the basement. I learned to move with a new, stealthy quiet. I learned the art of subterfuge. I would bring my tools upstairs at the end of each session, hiding them in my own small closet. I would sweep up every last speck of sawdust, leaving the workshop as pristine and as dusty as I had found it. I was a ghost in my own house, but now I was a ghost with a project. I spent the first week just preparing the wood, planing, sanding, cutting the boards to the right length with a fine-toothed handsaw. The sound of the saw, a soft, rhythmic rasp, was a new kind of music. Zing-zang, zing-zang. Each cut was a word in a long, angry conversation I was having with my son-in-law. You belong in a coffin. Each forward stroke was his insult. Each backward stroke was my reply. Then came the joinery. This was the hardest part. The part that required a skill I did not truly possess, only one I had observed. I was building the casket using dovetail joints, a beautiful, interlocking joint that is a hallmark of fine craftsmanship. Arthur had been a master of it. His dovetails were a thing of beauty, precise and perfect. My first attempts were a disaster. The cuts were uneven. The joints were loose. I wanted to weep with frustration. I sat on the floor of the workshop, surrounded by my ruined pieces of precious walnut, and I almost gave up. I could feel the presence of my husband in the room, his gentle, patient spirit. And I could feel his disappointment. "You're rushing it, Bea," I could almost hear him say. "Let the tool do the work. Feel the wood. Don't fight it." I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes. I remembered the way his hands had moved, the economy of his motion, the confident, patient rhythm of his work. I picked up the saw again. I slowed down. I stopped trying to force it. I began to listen to the wood, to the tools. And slowly, painstakingly, my hands began to remember. The cuts became cleaner, the joints tighter. I was not my husband. I would never be the artist he was. But I was his student. And I was learning. The walls of the coffin began to take shape. 4 walls of rich, dark, polished walnut, their dovetail joints a testament to my own stubborn, angry perseverance. As I worked, I would talk to Richard, a running, one-sided monologue in my head. "You see this joint, Richard?" I would think, as I carefully tapped a dovetail into place. "This is called a joint. It's what holds things together. It's about strength, and connection, and a perfect fit. All things you know nothing about. You think a person is a number on a spreadsheet?" I would muse, as I sanded a panel to a glassy smoothness. A person is like this wood. They have a grain. They have a history. And if you try to go against the grain, they will split and break in your hands. The project consumed me. It was a physical and an emotional crucible. Some days, I would be so stiff and sore, I could barely climb the stairs back to my room. But every day, I would force myself back down into that dusty, sacred space. The act of creation was my salvation. I was not just building a coffin, I was rebuilding myself. I was taking my broken pieces, my grief, my rage, my humiliation, and I was joining them together into something strong and solid and beautiful. The house upstairs continued its life of quiet, sterile tension. Claire and Richard's marriage was clearly fraying. I would hear their arguments, muffled through the floorboards. They were always about money. Richard's temper was growing shorter, his frustration more palpable. He was a man under pressure, and he was becoming more of a bully to my daughter. One afternoon, I was in the basement, carefully applying the first coat of tung oil to the finished side panels, when I heard the basement door open. My heart leaped into my throat. It was Claire. I hadn't heard her come home. "Mom," she called down the dark stairs. "Are you down there? I thought I heard something." I froze, my hand holding the oily rag, the sharp, sweet scent of the tung oil, suddenly a cloying, incriminating perfume. The coffin panels were laid out on the workbench, gleaming and undeniable. I quickly, silently, threw the heavy canvas tarp over them. "I'm here, dear," I called up, my voice trembling slightly. "Just looking through some old boxes." She came down the stairs slowly, a look of unease on her face. She had not been in this basement in years. She looked around at the dusty, shadowy space, at the silent, sleeping tools. "What are you doing down here, Mom?" she asked. "It's so creepy." "Just remembering," I said, which was the truth. "Remembering your father." She looked at the large, tarp-covered shape on the workbench. "What's that?" "Just some old lumber your father was saving," I said, my heart pounding. "I was just tidying up." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sad, distracted pity. She saw a lonely old woman, clinging to the ghosts of the past. She did not see a vengeful fury, hard at work on a masterpiece of handcrafted malice. "Well, be careful, Mom," she said, her voice soft. "Don't hurt yourself." She turned and went back up the stairs, leaving me alone in the shadows with my terrible, beautiful secret. The near miss only strengthened my resolve. I became more careful, more meticulous in my secrecy. The final stage of the construction was the lid. It was the most complex piece, a raised, paneled lid that had to fit perfectly. It took me a full week of careful measuring, cutting, and joining. The day I finished it, The day I dry-fitted it onto the main body of the casket for the first time was a day of profound, terrible triumph. It was no longer a collection of wooden parts. It was a coffin. It was a perfect, elegant, and deeply menacing object. It had a physical presence, a weight, a reality that was far more powerful than Richard's cheap, cruel words. I stood back and I looked at it. It was beautiful. The walnut grain glowed with a deep inner fire. The joints were tight and clean. It was the finest piece of work I had ever done. It was a testament to my husband's craft and to my own rage. Arthur built cradles for the soul. I had built a cradle for a monster. All that was left was the final, personal touch. The hardware and the nameplate. I found the hardware in one of Arthur's old catalogs. Solid, heavy, antiqued brass handles, and elegant, hinged clasps. I ordered them online, using a prepaid credit card, and had them delivered to a post office box I had rented in a nearby town. The final piece was the nameplate. A simple, rectangular brass plate. I took it to an old engraving shop in the city, a place I had used for years for my restoration projects. The old man behind the counter squinted at the piece of paper on which I had written the name. Richard Sterling, he read, looking at me over his glasses. A memorial for your husband? No, I said, my voice clear and steady. For my son-in-law. He raised an eyebrow but, thankfully, asked no more questions. A week later, I had it all. A finished, polished, perfect coffin. A set of heavy brass handles. And a small, engraved brass plate. The next Tuesday, while Claire was at her bridge game, and Richard was at work, I began the final assembly. I screwed the handles into place. I affixed the hinges. And then, with a small hammer and a set of tiny brass screws, I attached the nameplate to the center of the lid. I stood back and read the words. Richard Sterling. My work was done. My masterpiece was complete. It sat in the center of my husband's workshop, a thing of terrible, silent, patient beauty. It was waiting. Now, all I had to do was arrange for the unveiling. For a month after its completion, my masterpiece sat in the silent, dusty workshop, hidden under a heavy canvas tarp. It was a silent, waiting predator. Upstairs, life continued its slow, grinding descent into misery. Richard's temper grew shorter, his sighs of martyrdom more frequent. Claire walked on eggshells, her face a pale mask of anxious exhaustion. The house was thick with a tension that was more oppressive than the silence of the basement. I knew it was time. The stage was set. All that was needed was the curtain to rise. My plan for the unveiling was not a complex one. It was a plan that relied on my own perceived weakness and on my son-in-law's predictable, self-serving nature. It was a plan that required me to become, for one last time, the frail, helpless old woman he believed me to be. I chose a Thursday afternoon. Claire was at her weekly volunteer shift at the hospital. Richard, who had been working from home more often, was in his upstairs office, his door firmly shut. I made my slow, deliberate way to the basement door. I unlocked it and descended the steep stairs, my heart not with fear, but with the cold, calm purpose of an actor about to step onto the stage for the final, most important scene of the play. I did not go near the coffin. Instead, I went to the far side of the workshop, where Arthur had stored old, rickety wooden sawhorses and stacks of forgotten lumber. I took a deep breath. And then, with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I shoved one of the stacks of lumber. It fell with a satisfying chaotic crash, the sound echoing through the basement. As part of the clatter, I allowed myself to fall. It was not a difficult feat. My old bones were happy to oblige. I slumped to the concrete floor amidst the scattered wood, careful to land on my already aching hip. The pain was real, a sharp, white-hot flash that made me gasp. It was a small price to pay. I lay there for a moment, catching my breath. Then I reached into the pocket of the old housecoat I was wearing and retrieved the small plastic personal alarm Richard had insisted I wear around my neck. For emergencies. He had given it to me not out of concern, but so he could feel he was fulfilling his duty. Now, his own performative act of care was about to become his undoing. I pressed the button. A shrill, piercing, electronic shriek filled the house. It was a sound designed to signal disaster, to summon help. I lay on the floor and waited. It took less than a minute. I heard his heavy footsteps pounding down the stairs. The basement door was flung open. Adeline. Richard's voice was sharp with annoyance, not concern. What in God's name is going on? What was that noise? He appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his handsome face a mask of fury. He saw the scattered lumber. And then he saw me, a pathetic, crumpled heap on the floor. For Christ's sake, he muttered, the profanity a low hiss. He saw not a medical emergency, but a profound, personal inconvenience. I fell, I whispered, my voice a frail, convincing imitation of a frightened old woman. I was looking for your father's old financial records, for you. I thought they might be down here, and I fell. I had planted the seed of a logical reason for being there, a reason that appealed to his own obsession with money. He stomped over to me, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the dusty concrete. Well, you shouldn't be down here at all, he snapped. This place is a death trap. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. Can you get up? He demanded, making no move to help me. I don't think so, I whimpered. My hip? He let out a long, suffering sigh. The sigh of a man whose afternoon had been ruined. He looked around, his mind already working, calculating the most efficient way to solve this problem. His eyes fell on the large, tarp-covered object on Arthur's workbench. It was in his way. He needed to move it to get a clear path to me. What is all this junk? He grumbled, striding over to it. We should have had all this hauled away. He grabbed a corner of the heavy canvas tarp. I need to move this out of the way, he said, more to himself than to me. I held my breath. The curtain was rising. He yanked the tarp off with a single, impatient pull. And there it was. The coffin sat on the workbench, gleaming under the single, bare light bulb. The black walnut wood glowed with a deep inner fire, its surface polished to a glassy smoothness. The antique brass handles shone with a dull, rich luster. It was not a box. It was a masterpiece. A thing of terrible, undeniable beauty. Richard froze. He stared at it, his mouth slightly agape. For a moment, his accountant's mind took over. He saw not a coffin, but a valuable object. An exquisite piece of handcrafted furniture. I could see the flicker of avarice in his eyes. This must be worth a fortune, his expression said. He walked around it slowly, running his hand over the smooth, polished wood, just as I had seen Arthur do 1,000 times. He was admiring the craftsmanship, the perfect dovetail joints, the elegant raised panels. And then he saw the nameplate. It was small, a simple, rectangular brass plate affixed to the center of the lid. His eyes, accustomed to reading the fine print of contracts, squinted to make out the elegant, engraved script. He leaned closer. His breath hitched. His face, which had been a mask of greed and annoyance, went completely, utterly white. The color drained from it as if a plug had been pulled. He had read the name. His name. Richard Sterling. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his chest, a choked, guttural sound escaping his throat. He looked from the nameplate to me, lying on the floor, my face a mask of frail innocence, and back to the coffin. His coffin. His mind, his logical, orderly accountant's mind, tried to make sense of the impossible. It tried to file this under prank, under coincidence, under mistake, but it would not fit. The sheer, insane, meticulous reality of the object before him defied all logic. The craftsmanship, the quality, the patience, the hatred. What is this? He whispered, his voice a raw, strangled thing. I looked up at him from the floor. The frail, helpless old woman was gone. My eyes were clear, cold, and steady. My voice, when I spoke, was no longer a whisper. It was a quiet, resonant bell of judgment. You said I belonged in a coffin, Richard, I said. I decided you were right. Someone in this house certainly does. but I felt the craftsmanship should be up to Arthur's standards. It had to be a custom piece. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, primal terror. The kind of terror a rational man feels when he comes face to face with the absolute, undeniable reality of the irrational. He was not looking at his mother-in-law anymore. He was looking at his executioner. "You're insane," he breathed. "You're a crazy old witch." "No, Richard," I said calmly. "I'm just a very good student. I had a wonderful teacher." I gestured around the workshop. As for my sanity, well, I suppose that depends on your perspective. Is it crazier to wish a person into a coffin, or to actually build them one? He had no answer. He just stood there, trembling, his perfect, orderly world shattered by a beautiful, terrible box made of walnut and rage. The sound that finally broke the silence was the sound of the back door opening upstairs. It was Claire, home from her bridge game. "Hello?" she called out. "Richard? Mom? I'm home." Her voice, usually a source of anxiety for me, was now the sound of the cavalry arriving. The final player had entered the stage. "We're in the basement, Claire," I called up, my voice surprisingly strong. Richard flinched at the sound of my voice, as if he had forgotten I could speak in full sentences. He looked from me to the coffin, a cornered animal searching for an escape. We heard her footsteps on the stairs. "What on earth is going on down here?" she asked as she descended. "Richard, Mom's alarm went off, is she?" She stopped dead at the bottom of the stairs. She saw me on the floor. She saw the scattered lumber. And then she saw the coffin. Her reaction was different from Richard's. She did not see an asset. She saw an object of profound and terrible omen. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. "My God," she whispered. "What is that?" It looks like one of Dad's." "MEP." "It is," I said quietly. "I made it." She looked from the coffin to me, a dawning horror on her face. And then, her gaze, like her husband's before her, fell upon the small gleaming brass nameplate. She took a hesitant step closer. She squinted. She read the name. And she screamed. It was not a loud scream. It was a soft, choked, terrible sound. The sound of a person's entire world breaking apart. She looked at her husband, at his ashen, terrified face. She looked at me, at my calm, steady gaze. And she looked at the coffin, the beautiful, monstrous thing that sat between us, a physical manifestation of all the unspoken cruelty, all the greed, all the silent betrayals that had poisoned their marriage, their home. "What have you done?" she whispered, her question directed not at me, but at her husband. "May?" Richard sputtered, finding his voice at last, a voice high and thin with hysteria. "She did this! Your mother! She's insane! She built me a coffin! She's threatening me!" "Am I, Richard?" I asked from the floor. "Or am I simply granting your wish? You told me I belonged in a coffin. You said it was a waste of money to keep me alive. So I thought I would save you the expense. I used your father-in-law's old wood. It cost me nothing but my time. A resource, as you know, that I have in abundance." "When?" Claire stared at her husband, her eyes filled with a new, dawning, horrified clarity. She was finally seeing him, not as the strong, practical man she had married, but as a monster, a man who would speak such words to her own mother. "Did you say that to her?" Claire asked, her voice a deadly quiet whisper. "Did you tell my mother she belonged in a coffin?" Richard couldn't meet her eyes. His blustering rage collapsed into a pathetic, guilty silence. And in that silence, Claire's choice was made. The spell was broken. She walked over to me, her movements calm and deliberate. She knelt on the cold, dirty floor beside me. She did not try to help me up. She simply took my hand. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I am so sorry. I've been so blind." We stayed like that for a long time, two women on a dusty floor, holding hands amidst the wreckage. Richard just stood by the workbench, a ghost at his own funeral, staring at the beautiful, terrible box that bore his name. The aftermath was the quiet, methodical dismantling of a life. Claire called an ambulance for me, not because I was truly hurt, but as a pretext to get me out of that house, away from him. My hip was bruised, nothing more. While I was at the hospital, Claire packed our bags. When I was discharged 2 days later, she did not take me back to the house of white walls and silent rage. She took me to a hotel. The divorce was quiet and swift. Richard did not contest it. He was a broken man, haunted by a piece of furniture he could not bring himself to move, to touch, to destroy. He sold the house at a loss, desperate to escape the shadow of the thing in the basement. What became of the coffin? I do not know for sure. Claire told me the new owners of the house were a young, artistic couple who found it during their inspection. They didn't see a coffin. They saw a beautiful, handcrafted blanket chest, a piece of unique folk art. They were, apparently, thrilled with their discovery. I find a certain dark, poetic justice in that. My monument to rage, my curse made of wood, is now likely sitting at the foot of someone's bed, holding their warm, woolen blankets. Claire and I found a small, quiet apartment together. We are healing. Or rather, we are learning to build something new from the broken pieces of our old life. Our relationship is not what it was. The trust, once so carelessly shattered, is a delicate, fragile thing. But we are talking. And we are listening. And it is a start. I did not build that coffin to threaten my son-in-law's life. I built it to save my own. I built it to take my grief and my rage and my humiliation and turn them into something solid, something real, something beautiful. It was an act of creation in the face of my own erasure. He told me I was worthless, so I created something of terrible, undeniable worth. He sentenced me to a box, so I built a better one and put his name on it. The world will try to tell you what you are worth. It will try to put you in a box, to label you, to write you off as a depreciating asset. Do not let it. You must find your own workshop. You must find your own tools, your own materials, whatever they may be, and you must build your own monument. Build it out of your pain, your joy, your history. Build it with your own 2 hands. Create something so strong, so beautiful, so undeniably you, that it cannot be ignored. And then, put your own name on it, and own it. Thank you for allowing me to share my strange and difficult story with you. It is a story about the terrible things we can do to each other, but also about the beautiful, unexpected ways we can find to save ourselves. Please, show your support for this channel by liking this video, subscribing, and clicking that notification bell. In the comments below, I would love for you to tell me about something you have made with your own 2 hands, something that holds a special story for you. Let's fill this space with our own acts of creation. Love you all. This is Grandma Adeline, and I'll see you in the next story.